Just as, if not more important, as preserving human-made artifacts is the importance and unique qualities of the natural world. The natural world of Canada's westernmost province, British Columbia, the old-growth forests have a long and storied past of our Aboriginal peoples, the early settlers, and yes, even the Instagram travel warriors of today. The natural world never ceases to amaze, humbling us with its sheer might. The mighty redwood and Douglas firs and the western red cedar trees of the western North Americas are the largest living organisms in existence. Today, we will be looking at the Douglas fir and its unique history in Canada's west coast. Douglas firs trees reach an incredible height of 76 meters and often grow to 60 meters in height, with a 2-meter diameter that can make anything look small in comparison. The trees are named after David Douglas, a Scottish botanist and early discoverer, who introduced many of British Columbia's native trees into Europe. The Douglas fir needs direct sunlight, which is why it grows to such incredible heights. Douglas firs are an incredible pillar, untouched by the modern world. Some are as old as 800 years old, measuring almost 9 meters in circumference. The Douglas fir can be found on the west coast of Canada and the United States. Logging operations first took place on the southern mainland coast and Vancouver Island. Old-growth forests can be found throughout the southern interior and central BC. These pure stand Douglas firs are 80% of the trees in the main canopy of a single species. The Menzies variety, located on the west-east range of Douglas fir, is the greatest of the conifers on the western North Americas. Its native range is from central British Columbia, south along the Pacific coast, and down on the coastal provinces and states, almost 2,200 kilometers. This represents the range of the typical conifer or green variety. The Douglas fir has much heritage value to the indigenous peoples. As tools, the Douglas fir were used as cooking fuel, fishing hooks, and handles, and the bough was frequently used as floor coverings for lodges and sweat lodges. A Pacific West indigenous legend tells the story of a great fire in the forest. All the animals began to flee and escape the fire. The birds flew, the deer ran. However, the mice, with their tiny little legs, were unable to run away from the fire. They asked the maple tree, the western hemlock, and the western red cedar for help, but none were able to. Then they reached the Douglas fir, who encouraged them to climb up its fire-resistant trunk for refuge in its fern cones. The mice took shelter inside the cones and survived the devastating fire. Even to this day, if you look at the cones of the Douglas fir close up, you can see the tiny little hands and feet sticking out from the bottom of the cones. These pure stands of Douglas firs stood tall for almost 1,000 years in the North Americas. Throughout the western Washington, Oregon, and Kemleth of the West Coast Range, down all the way to California and Santa Cruz Mountains. These Douglas firs were a backdrop to history itself. To early European settlers, the Douglas fir was the most important timber of the western United States and British Columbia. For the British Columbia coastal forest industry and indigenous peoples, the straight-trunked conifer was the perfect building material. In the 1700s, Europeans discovered its superior quality for ship mass. In the 1800s, the abundance of coastal timber was important for BC's early forest industry as it emerged. The earliest mills on Vancouver Island, the Lower Mainland, Brower Inlet, and Vancouver Island's Port Alberni established British Columbia's reputation worldwide as an excellent source of quality timber, with exports including Chile, Shanghai, Australia, and Hawaii. Now, throughout the 1850s and 1860s, timber was sold from British Columbia worldwide for ships used to build to use. Throughout the 1850s and 60s, timber was sold for BC's worldwide shipbuilding to aid in the export of gold during the BC Gold Rush. Also in the 1800s, a huge quantity of timber was needed to build the Canada Pacific Railway. Then, around the 1820s, Douglas firs were used as Christmas trees, and from the 1820s to the 50s, culturing these saplings had become more popular rather than harvesting them from the forest mainland. The term old growth forest is not a scientific term. It's actually a logging industry term originating in the temperate forests of the Pacific Northwest coast as a way to prioritize large trees with the highest dollar value. In British Columbia, the province defines old growth trees as being more than 250 years old, and in the central forests of British Columbia, they're known to be at least 140 years old. In the past, many forest companies were driven only by economic concerns, how to get the most timber out of the forest in as little time as possible and with as little cost. Logging on the coast of British Columbia has evolved from simple, hand-logged, and highly mechanized production in today's industry. Manual labor has been reduced and productivity has increased. The coastal forest industry has been through three major phases: horse and oxen logging, railroad logging, and finally truck logging today. Douglas-fir lumber, usually known as Oregon pine or yellow fir, amounts to one-fourth of all lumber produced in the United States and Canada. Douglas-fir does not warp, and it's easily worked. It is cut down for its specific use in the construction industry and their need for high-quality wood. For heavy timber, telephone poles, high-end and specialty products such as furniture, music instruments, and finishes, as well as shingles. Some other products of the Douglas-Fir include light brown dyes obtained from the bark, as it is a source of tannins. The bark can also be used as a cork substitute, and interestingly, it can be used as a fertilizer. It is often used as a fire starter, as the bark contains pitch, which burns hot and produces no smoke. It also has insecticidal properties. The resin obtained from the trunk can be used for manufacturing glues, candles, and the cement for microscope slides. It can also be used to make soaps and perfumes, and finally the resin can be used as a caulk for boats. The technology used in coastal BC's early forest industry were the beginnings of large-scale mechanized clear-cutting. Now, sustainable forest practices, instead of extracting technologies, also consider the sensitive ecological systems they are working in. Partial cutting systems, like selective logging, can cause less soil disruption and requires less road construction. These sound forest practices and management can remove carbon from the atmosphere, which is why it is important for these trees for humanity and its historical value. Cathedral Grove, located in McMillan Provincial Park, is one of the most accessible stands of Douglas-Fir trees on Vancouver Island. Its accessibility makes it a great place for people to appreciate the marvelous trees. However, its location is a small park in size, and it's that accessibility that has left it vulnerable to high visitor usage. We must understand this ecosystem is very delicate and try to appreciate the trees with respect. The British Columbia government has implemented special tree provision regulations that came into effect on September 11, 2020, which aim to protect large standing trees. The BC government brought this regulation to protect the logging of these trees and to protect the environment. Sustainable foresting ensures that the forest can be used for future people, but not at the expense of the health of the forest and its wild inhabitants. Sustainable forest practices ensure that the forest is or are sustainable far into the future, consider ecological, environmental, and cultural concerns, strive for the long-term health of the forest and its resources, as well as strive for the ecological intent of the forest itself. The logging industry employs over 50,000 British Columbians, including 5,300 Indigenous peoples, and is worth upwards of $1.3 billion in the forest sector. Let's put that into perspective. Every year, 200,000 hectares of land is forested on BC lands. The province says that 27% of annual forest harvest is old growth. Today, recognizing the heritage value of forests is paramount to our survival. We have used trees to build our country, and they are the key to our survival in reducing climate change. We need to recognize the value in old growth forests and save them as much as possible. Forests are critical to people everywhere. It would be impossible to go through a day without using a product or something that comes from a forest. For example, furniture, toilet paper, and books, to name a few. It is critical for human survival to sustain forests for these reasons. Forests are also have an effect on the environment in which we live. Healthy forests ensure healthy streams and rivers. We cannot live without clean drinking water. Forests are home to wildlife, plants and animals. Plants and animals and people are all linked through the ecological systems that exist within all of these forests. For some people, including First Nations people, the forest also represents a spiritual and cultural significance. Conservation efforts will benefit all British Columbians and people around the world for decades to come. Thank you.